They were idols on the screen, but terrors once the cameras stopped rolling. The golden age of Hollywood painted its stars as flawless legends, yet behind the polished smiles lived darker realities. What happens when the very people adored by millions use that power to push, humiliate, and dominate everyone around them? Some stories are shocking, others downright disturbing. And the most surprising names on this list may not be the ones you expect. Joan Crawford, America's glamour queen, or Hollywood's nightmare at home. Joan Crawford's life was the stuff of legend. On screen, she embodied resilience and elegance. Off-screen, her perfectionism became infamous. Crawford demanded absolute control, and those who fell short often faced her fury. Crew members described sets where even minor mistakes could trigger a storm. Assistants, makeup artists, and junior staff were reduced to tears by her sharp tongue. Co-stars recalled how Crawford's icy presence could suffocate a room. She was less interested in teamwork and more focused on ensuring the spotlight never shifted away from her. But it was her role as a mother that left perhaps the most lasting mark on her reputation. Her adopted daughter, Christina, later shared unsettling stories of growing up under Crawford's iron hand, painting a portrait of a woman who saw control as love. The tales of screaming punishments, midnight cleanups, and cold detachment became legendary after the release of Christina's book. Whether every detail is accurate or not, Crawford's behavior remains one of Hollywood's most debated legacies. Admirers claim she was simply tough in a cutthroat industry. Detractors argue she thrived on cruelty, wielding authority like a weaponized script. Either way, her reign wasn't just about glamour. It was about dominance. And for many around her, it was unforgettable in the worst way. Bette Davis. She was the queen of intensity, and the queen of cutting people down. Bette Davis gave performances so powerful that audiences could barely look away. But those same sharp instincts on screen became daggers behind the scenes. Directors and crew quickly learned that Davis demanded everything her way. If a camera angle wasn't flattering, if a co-star upstaged her even slightly, Davis didn't just complain. She went to war. Colleagues described being humiliated on set, with Davis delivering biting remarks that stung harder than a slap. Her long-running feud with Joan Crawford was more than just Hollywood gossip. Davis allegedly turned filming into a battlefield, sabotaging takes, and even delivering extra force in scenes that required physical contact. The result? Crew members tiptoed around her, terrified that one wrong move might end their jobs. Even at home, Davis's intensity often spilled into cruelty. Her daughter, B.D. Hyman, later described life with Davis as emotional chaos, where affection was unpredictable and criticism was constant. Fans wanted to see a trailblazing icon. Her family saw a woman who wielded her power like a hammer. Some defend Davis as a perfectionist who cared too much about her craft. But for those left in her shadow, the line between passion and abuse wasn't blurred. It was obliterated. When Davis walked onto a set, everyone braced for a storm. Humphrey Bogart. Hollywood's tough guy didn't leave his cruelty at the studio gates. Humphrey Bogart built his career on playing sharp-tongued, hard-drinking loners who never backed down from a fight. What audiences didn't know was how much of that character bled into his real life. On set, Bogart could be merciless. Crew members whispered about his mean streak, especially when alcohol fueled his temper. He took particular pleasure in humiliating junior actors, mocking them until they broke. To him, dominance wasn't just part of a character, it was a way of life. His marriages didn't escape the fire either. His union with actress Mayo Methot was infamous for loud public clashes that often turned physical. Friends recalled seeing her show up at gatherings visibly shaken, while Bogart laughed it off as just another lover's spat. Even after finding stability with Laurence Bacall, the scars of his earlier years remained. What made Bogart's cruelty even more chilling was how casual it seemed. He could flip from charm to ridicule in seconds, leaving those around him constantly on edge. Directors admired his professionalism in front of the camera, but dreaded the chaos that came when the spotlight shifted away. Fans idolized Bogart as the ultimate anti-hero, but for the people closest to him, that anti-hero was real, and it wasn't charming. It was bruising, relentless, and unforgettable. Errol Flynn, swashbuckling hero on screen, tormentor off it. Errol Flynn swung from chandeliers, dueled with swords, and embodied adventure. Yet behind the camera, his life was far darker. His charm, legendary to audiences, often masked a cruel streak that left scars on anyone too close. Flynn's reputation for chasing thrills didn't stop with parties and yachts. Co-stars complained of his reckless pranks and deliberate sabotage. Actor Basil Rathbone admitted that sword fights with Flynn often ended in injury because Flynn missed his marks, on purpose. But it wasn't only peers who bore the brunt of his behavior. Actresses Ida Lupino and Ann Sheridan confided to friends that Flynn's presence on set was suffocating, his antics leaving them in fear. Warner Brothers allegedly assigned staff just to clean up his messes, both literal and reputational. Flynn's autobiography, with the ironic title My Wicked, Wicked Ways, hinted at his excesses, but conveniently glossed over the damage he left behind. Insiders, however, painted a different picture, one of an egotist who thrived on domination. Even in death, Flynn left behind a reputation so toxic that many in Hollywood privately admitted to feeling relief. To the public, he was the dashing rogue who made adventure look effortless. To those who endured his cruelty, he was a constant storm. The gulf between his screen heroics and real-life abuse is one of Hollywood's most unsettling contrasts. Judy Garland, the darling of MGM, had her own arsenal of cruelty. Judy Garland's life is remembered as tragic, an overworked child star who battled constant pressure. But there's another side rarely discussed. Garland herself could be deeply abusive toward those around her. Her unpredictable moods became legendary on set. One moment, she was sweet and generous. The next, she was unleashing verbal assaults that froze entire crews. Makeup artists and wardrobe staff often bore the brunt of her rage, with Garland hurling insults that stung long after filming wrapped. During the production of A Star is Born, colleagues recalled Garland tormenting younger actors, forcing endless retakes while publicly mocking their performances. It wasn't just about perfecting a scene, it was about breaking spirits. Crew members stood by, too intimidated to intervene. Even her children weren't safe from her volatility. Liza Minnelli later hinted at a household ruled by Garland's shifting moods, where affection could flip into punishment at the slightest provocation. According to one account, Garland once shut Liza in a dark room simply for stealing too much attention from visiting guests. Fans saw vulnerability and heartbreak in Garland's voice, but those closest saw how that same vulnerability became a tool of control. She could draw sympathy and then twist it into guilt, leaving others emotionally drained. Garland's pain was real, but so was her ability to pass it along. Wallace Beery, Hollywood's lovable lug, had a side no one wanted to see. Wallace Beery made audiences laugh and cry in classics like The Champ, but his co-stars, especially the youngest ones, often left sets with tears for a very different reason. Child actor Jackie Cooper once recalled how Beery would pinch him off camera to force genuine tears during emotional scenes. It might have made for unforgettable performances, but for Cooper, it was pure torment. And Beery wasn't shy about pushing boundaries. He was known to throw his weight around, quite literally, intimidating anyone who got in his way. Beery also had a reputation for sabotaging performances. Directors complained that he deliberately stepped on lines or shifted into camera angles meant for his co-stars. To him, acting wasn't collaboration, it was competition. And he always had to win. Rumors swirled about Beery's involvement in darker incidents that Hollywood's fixer squads were all too eager to bury. Nothing was ever proven, but the whispers alone made insiders shudder. Still, MGM kept him under contract, partly to control him, and partly to keep him from causing even more chaos at rival studios. Fans adored Beery for his rough charm. Behind the scenes, colleagues dreaded his presence. The yaoi contrast between the warm-hearted roles he played and the icy cruelty of his real personality remains one of the starkest reminders of how little audiences ever saw of the real Golden Age idols. Edward G. Robinson. The king of gangsters didn't need a script to play cruel. Edward G. Robinson terrified audiences in Little Caesar, but those who knew him off-screen often described a man just as volatile. His temper was legendary. Crew members reported outbursts where Robinson would hurl objects across the set in frustration. Assistants learned quickly. One wrong move could lead to a verbal tirade so sharp it left people shaken for days. And unlike other stars who saved their venom for the studio lot, Robinson carried his edge everywhere he went. But the darkest chapter came during the McCarthy era. When the House Un-American Activities Committee came calling, Robinson chose to save his career by naming friends and colleagues. Lives and reputations were destroyed in the process. For many in Hollywood, this wasn't just political survival. It was an act of betrayal that branded him forever. Robinson later admitted regret, but it was too late. The damage was done, and those he'd turned on never forgot. For them, Robinson wasn't just a fiery actor. He was a man who weaponized fear to protect himself. Audiences loved Robinson's grit. But inside the industry, his name often meant intimidation, humiliation, and betrayal. And sometimes, the role of villain isn't just fiction. It's the truth people live with long after the cameras stop rolling. Clara Bow, Hollywood's original It Girl, had a darker side that few fans knew. Clara Bow rose from crushing poverty to become the face of the Roaring Twenties. On screen, she was magnetic. Off-screen, the scars of her difficult upbringing often erupted into behavior that left others wounded. Bow was known for sudden fiery tantrums. Assistants described how she'd unleash fury over minor mistakes, screaming and throwing objects until the entire household froze. She also directed her anger at rival actresses. If she sensed competition, she made sure they felt humiliated, sometimes by mocking them in front of crowds, sometimes by spreading cruel whispers behind their backs. Her household staff bore the brunt of her volatility. Former employees told of being berated and reduced to tears. And as fame weighed heavily on her, Bow's paranoia worsened. The arrival of sound films only added fuel, as critics mocked her Brooklyn accent. That ridicule cut deep, and she pushed her frustration onto those around her. Paramount exploited her fame, but did little to support her well-being, leaving Bow to spiral publicly. By her late 20s, she was already retreating from Hollywood, her career burned out by personal chaos and reputation. Fans still cherish her as a symbol of the jazz age, but those who lived in her orbit saw the pain she passed along. Bow's story isn't just one of stardom. It's a reminder of how unresolved wounds can turn into cruelty that ripples outward. Miriam Hopkins, one of the most talented actresses of her era, and one of the most ruthless. Miriam Hopkins dazzled audiences with her wit and sophistication, but colleagues learned quickly that working with her could be a nightmare. Hopkins was notorious for sabotaging her co-stars. If a rival actress had a powerful moment in a scene, Hopkins might accidentally stand in front of the camera, blocking the shot. Directors reported endless retakes, demanded not for perfection, but for control. She thrived on making others squirm. Her feud with Bette Davis became the stuff of legend. On set, the tension between them wasn't just uncomfortable, it was toxic. Hopkins's cutting remarks and manipulative behavior pushed Davis to retaliate, creating an atmosphere so charged that crew members described filming as an endurance test. Even off-screen, Hopkins carried her competitiveness into friendships and professional circles. She was known to whisper rumors about rivals, carefully cultivating divisions that made her the center of attention. Her cruelty wasn't loud or explosive. It was calculated, like a chess player ensuring victory no matter the cost. Eventually, her reputation caught up with her. Studios tired of the delays and endless drama, and her once bright career dimmed. Yet even in decline, colleagues admitted her intelligence made her cruelty sting deeper. She didn't just want to win, she wanted others to lose, and lose hard. Hopkins's story shows how ambition can turn brilliance into destruction. She may have been unforgettable on screen, but for those who worked with her, her legacy came with scars. Carole Lombard. Hollywood's funny girl wasn't always laughing with you. Sometimes she was laughing at you. Carole Lombard is remembered for her quick wit, dazzling charm, and tragic early death. But behind the charm was a streak of cruelty that often hid behind pranks. Her practical jokes were legendary, but not everyone found them funny. Lombard's favorite targets were often crew members or less powerful actors who couldn't fight back. She might set up an embarrassing stunt that left someone humiliated in front of the entire set, then brush it off as harmless fun. For those on the receiving end, it was anything but harmless. Her temper was just as fierce. Lombard was known to unleash profanity-laced tirades that shocked even seasoned Hollywood veterans. She could switch from playful to blistering in seconds, leaving people reeling from the whiplash. Some chalked it up to her determination to be one of the boys in a male-dominated industry, but others saw it differently, a cruel streak disguised as humor. While the public adored her, insiders whispered about the damage her jokes left behind. Her sudden death in a plane crash at age 33 froze her image in time, cementing her as a beloved icon. Yet many of the stories about her, behind-the-scenes cruelty, faded from public memory. To this day, Lombard is remembered more for her sparkle than her storms. Still, those who worked under her pranks and tirades might have remembered a very different Carole, one who could wound as easily as she could charm. Mickey Rooney, the boy wonder who grew into Hollywood's terror. Mickey Rooney was once America's sweetheart, the wide-eyed Andy Hardy, who charmed audiences with innocence. Off-screen, however, Rooney's behavior was far from endearing. Despite his small stature, Rooney carried an ego big enough to fill any studio lot. Colleagues often described him as relentless in chasing attention and merciless toward those who didn't give it. Young actresses complained about his constant advances, and many reported feeling unsafe in his presence. His temper didn't help. When Rooney didn't get what he wanted, he exploded in spectacular fashion, shouting down assistants, directors, or anyone nearby. His personal life was equally stormy. 8 marriages left behind trails of bitterness, with multiple partners later describing patterns of emotional cruelty. Rooney seemed unable to maintain healthy relationships, preferring domination over compromise. Friends admitted that his anger could flip from playful to frightening without warning. Even as his career declined, Rooney's bitterness grew sharper. He lashed out at Hollywood itself, blaming others for his fall, rather than accepting responsibility. Crew members who worked with him later in life said the cheerful boy who once lit up screens had become unpredictable and venomous. Audiences adored Rooney's on-screen charm, but those who knew him closely often saw something else entirely. A man who could turn charm into control and laughter into intimidation. His legacy is complicated, but his cruelty is undeniable. Ginger Rogers. The graceful dancer wasn't so graceful behind the curtain. Ginger Rogers was forever linked with Fred Astaire, gliding across screens with elegance. Yet insiders whispered about a very different woman, one far less charming and far more cutting. Rogers was determined to be seen as more than Astaire's partner. That ambition often showed itself in ways that hurt others. She demanded equal billing, pushed for script changes that highlighted her role, and reportedly blocked co-stars she saw as competition. Directors said she had a knack for reworking scenes until she stood firmly in the spotlight. Her treatment of crew members was just as tough. Rogers was known for berating assistants and dismissing those she considered beneath her. Her sharp tongue left costume designers and makeup artists in tears, and her sense of moral superiority sometimes added fuel to the fire. She criticized colleagues for their lifestyles, creating tension in an industry already built on fragile egos. While her public persona was pure glamour and wholesomeness, Rogers carefully curated that image, leaving her more ruthless behavior behind the curtain. For her, Hollywood wasn't about kindness. It was about survival, and she was willing to cut down anyone who stood in her way. Rogers may have danced backward in heels, but her climb to the top was anything but delicate. For those who crossed her, it was less waltz and more battlefield. William Frawley, Fred Mertz on screen, but a menace off it. William Frawley became beloved to millions as Lucy, and Ricky's grumpy neighbor in I Love Lucy. But off camera, Frawley's alcoholism and vicious streak made him a nightmare to work with. Vivian Vance, who played his on-screen wife Ethel, bore the brunt of his cruelty. He regularly hurled insults about her weight, age, and talent, often loud enough for the entire crew to hear. Their scenes together may have looked like comic bickering, but for Vance, it was relentless humiliation. Frawley's temper was infamous. Younger performers described feeling terrified when he erupted in drunken rages. He threw slurs around with abandon, poisoning the atmosphere on set. Lucille Ball herself kept him employed largely out of pity, but even she had to set firm rules. Frawley wasn't allowed to drink before filming, or he'd be replaced. Despite his reputation, audiences never saw the darker side. To fans, he was the lovable curmudgeon. To colleagues, he was a constant source of tension and abuse. His story is a reminder that sitcom laughter often hid real-life pain. While Lucy's show remains a treasure of classic television, the truth about Frawley lingers in the shadows. Behind the gruff neighbor's act was a man whose cruelty scarred his co-workers long after the laugh track faded. Joan Bennett, the glamorous noir queen, could cut deeper than any script. Joan Bennett projected icy sophistication in her films, but off-camera she wielded that same coldness like a blade. Bennett was notorious for her treatment of subordinates. Makeup artists and costume designers were often reduced to tears by her sharp remarks and impossible demands. She expected perfection, and when she didn't get it, she didn't just complain, she made sure everyone knew they had failed. Her cruelty wasn't confined to staff. As she aged, Bennett became fiercely protective of her status. Younger actresses who threatened to outshine her found themselves targeted. Colleagues whispered about scenes sabotaged, and rival reputations quietly dismantled. Bennett didn't just want to succeed, she wanted others to stumble. Her personal life reflected the same cold streak. When her husband, producer Walter Wanger, shot her agent in a fit of jealousy, Bennett used the chaos to negotiate better contracts instead of showing concern for the victim. Insiders were stunned by her ability to turn a tragedy into leverage. To the public, Bennett remained the embodiment of smoky allure. To those who worked with her, she was a reminder that cruelty can be quiet, calculated, and devastating. She may not have shouted the loudest, but her words and actions left the deepest scars. Clifton Webb, wit as sharp as a knife, and just as painful. Clifton Webb didn't find Hollywood stardom until his 50s, but when he did, he made a mark, not only on screen, but on those who worked beside him. Webb was celebrated for his acid wit, a quick tongue that could cut anyone down to size. What fans saw as sophisticated banter, colleagues experienced as relentless humiliation. He mocked younger actors for their inexperience, sneered at crew members, and left people second-guessing themselves long after the camera stopped. His perfectionism only made things worse. Webb demanded endless retakes, often mocking those who couldn't keep pace. To him, it wasn't enough to succeed. Others had to fail, preferably in public. The result was sets filled with dread whenever he appeared. Even his personal relationships revealed a darker edge. Webb lived with his mother until her death at age 91. But insiders reported a toxic, controlling bond that left her diminished. What looked like devotion was, behind closed doors, a pattern of psychological domination that unsettled everyone who witnessed it. Webb's cruelty wasn't explosive like some of his peers. It was slow, deliberate, and razor-sharp. He didn't need to shout to wound. His words alone were enough to scar. For audiences, Webb remains the epitome of style and wit. For those who endured him, he was something far different. A master of cruelty who turned sarcasm into a weapon of choice. Barbara Stanwyck. The tough-talking star lived up to her screen persona, and not in a good way. Barbara Stanwyck clawed her way from poverty into Hollywood royalty. Her sharp intelligence and determination made her unstoppable, but they also made her one of the most feared figures on set. Stanwyck was known for her photographic memory. If a co-star flubbed even a single line, she caught it, and often humiliated them publicly for it. Crew members recalled how she wielded that knowledge like a weapon, exposing mistakes to remind everyone of her superiority. Her cruelty was especially sharp toward actresses she believed relied on charm rather than skill. Stanwyck reportedly despised women she saw as coasting, and she didn't hesitate to cut them down with scathing remarks. Some described her words as surgical strikes, designed to leave permanent damage. Later in her career, television crews admitted they lived in fear of her temper. Her demands grew more relentless with age, and her intolerance for mistakes only intensified. One wrong move could mean an entire production stalled until she cooled off. To the public, Stanwyck was a symbol of grit and independence. But for many who worked alongside her, she was a storm waiting to strike. Her success is undeniable, but so is the fear she left in her wake. James Cagney, Hollywood's gangster king, had a temper that rivaled his characters. James Cagney brought explosive energy to films like White, Heat. But the same intensity that thrilled audiences often terrified colleagues. Cagney was infamous for his quick fuse. If something on set didn't go his way, he could unleash a verbal barrage that left entire crews frozen. Co-stars described feeling deliberately thrown off during performances. Cagney would change blocking mid-scene, or improvise in ways designed to rattle them. For him, the set was less about collaboration and more about domination. His grudge-holding abilities were legendary. Once Cagney disliked you, that reputation stuck. Some insiders claimed he used his influence with Warner Brothers to quietly sideline actors he considered untalented, or worse, disloyal. His activism may have been principled, but he blurred the line between conviction and cruelty when dealing with rivals. Even his friends admitted that working with Cagney required stamina. You had to endure his storms and hope you came out stronger. For some, he was an inspiring figure. For others, he was a bully who thrived on intimidation. Audiences may remember his iconic top-of-the-world Ashish cry, but for those who endured his rage, Cagney's presence felt like living under constant fire. Mary Astor. The diary that shocked Hollywood wasn't the only scandal in her life. Mary Astor, remembered for the Maltese Falcon, lived a life filled with whispers and shadows. But behind the gossip was a pattern of cruelty that scarred those closest to her. Unlike stars who raged openly, Astor's cruelty was psychological. She played mind games, carefully manipulating friends and rivals to get her way. Colleagues recalled how she spread rumors designed to isolate co-stars, leaving them scrambling to defend reputations she had quietly dismantled. Her daughter, Marilyn, bore the worst of it. Insiders described a household where Astor treated her child less as family and more as competition. Whenever Marilyn received attention, Astor found ways to cut her down. The emotional toll was immense, leaving lasting scars on Marilyn's sense of self-worth. On set, Astor's games were equally destructive. She thrived on creating divisions within casts, ensuring that loyalty flowed her way. Her intelligence made her cruelty especially effective. It wasn't loud, it wasn't messy, but it left damage that lingered long after filming wrapped. Astor remains celebrated for her elegance on screen, But her real-life story tells another tale. The woman audiences adored could also be a master manipulator, turning charm into a tool for control. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. One of silent film's biggest stars, left behind one of Hollywood's darkest reputations. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle was known for broad slapstick comedy, but behind the laughs was a man whose behavior terrified insiders. Arbuckle's size and strength often became weapons during filming. Extras and stunt performers reported being injured during comedic bits, where Arbuckle brushed off their pain as part of the act. His colleagues described him as reckless, caring little for the well-being of those around him as long as the gag worked. The infamous 1921 trial that destroyed his career revealed a world of excess and cruelty. While Arbuckle was acquitted, testimony painted him as someone who used his fame and physical dominance to intimidate and mistreat others. Hollywood insiders weren't surprised. For years, they had whispered about his behavior behind closed doors, protected by studios eager to cash in on his popularity. After the scandal, Arbuckle was effectively banned from appearing on screen. The industry didn't just fear public backlash, it feared what insiders already knew. His downfall may have been sparked by one event, but it was rooted in a pattern of abusive behavior that insiders could no longer ignore. Today, Arbuckle's name is often cited as the cautionary tale of excess. But for those who endured his cruelty long before the headlines, the scandal was just the final confirmation of what they already knew. Laurence Olivier, a titan of the stage, and a tyrant in real life. Laurence Olivier is often hailed as one of the greatest actors of all time, but those who worked with him frequently saw a side that was far less noble. Olivier's relationships were especially notorious. With actress Vivien Leigh, his partner and co-star, he reportedly wielded psychological control, belittling her struggles and diminishing her in both public and private. What fans thought of as a golden couple was, behind closed doors, a storm of dominance and cruelty. Colleagues described Olivier as ruthless on set. He demanded absolute obedience, dismissing the opinions of actors and directors alike. If someone fell short of his exacting standards, Olivier's tongue could be brutal. Many recalled how his words carried the weight of both intelligence and arrogance, cutting deeper than mere insults. Even his peers admitted he could be charming when he wanted, but the charm was often calculated. Olivier knew how to manipulate rooms, turning allies into pawns and rivals into targets. For younger actors, working with him was both an honor and a trial by fire. While his artistic genius is unquestionable, Olivier's legacy is complicated by the damage he left behind. To the world, he was the epitome of Shakespearean grandeur. To those who stood in his shadow, he was a master of control, whose brilliance came at the expense of others. The golden age of Hollywood gave us unforgettable movies, but behind those glowing screens lived stars who thrived on power, cruelty, and control. These weren't just difficult personalities, they were storms disguised as legends. So the next time you watch a classic, remember, the beauty on screen often came at an ugly cost. What do you think? Can we separate the art from the abuse? Let us know below, and don't forget to subscribe for more.